Hello, my name is Angela Rice Beamer, and this program is called Chautauqua. If you're not familiar with a Chautauqua, it's a living history humanities program that helps us learn about history in a fun and interesting way. During a Chautauqua, a scholar actor dresses up in full costume and performs as a famous person in history. Tonight's Chautauqua character was born in Maryland and earned the nickname the Great Bambino. He was one of the greatest baseball players of all time. Tonight's Chautauqua character is baseball legend Babe Ruth.
Evening. They wouldn't let me smoke it in here. Fish swim in this, you know. It wasn't easy growing up a young boy in Baltimore, and I was a bad kid. It was a rough, tough neighborhood, but I liked it. I despised school, and I feared and hated the coppers. I don't say this with any great sense of pride. I say it because I feel that it must be said, because my one great hope is to help some young boy or girl who stands today where I stood then. And it wasn't an orphanage like those newspaper boys like to write. It was St. Mary's Industrial School for Boys. Well, it's where they sent you if you were branded and incorrigible. I was sent there at the age of 7. Well, I guess smoking and drinking at that age will brand you an incorrigible. It was at St. Mary's that I met the greatest man I've ever known, Brother Matthias, of the Xaverian order. Now, the brothers worked with underprivileged children in Europe and here. When I first got to St. Mary's, he took me under his wing. It wasn't that I became his pet. I just think he realized that I needed the attention the most. It was Brother Matthias that saw that I had a talent for throwing and catching a baseball. I became a hitter the first time I saw him bat. Oh, he'd stand in the work yard, holding a ball in his left hand, holding a bat in his right. And he'd throw that ball up and he'd give it a whack. Now, in those days, the balls weren't much more than mush. And by the time they got to St. Mary's, they were much worse. When he felt like it, he'd hit that ball over the fence. That ball had to travel 350 feet. It was quite a sock when you consider he did it with just one arm. It'd be quite a sock even today when the manufacturers are putting the whole rabbit into the ball. After I saw him bat, I tried to do everything just like him. Well, I even started running with a toed-in manner, which I still use today. He became my hero. He not only taught us how to read and write, he tried to teach us right from wrong. Now, when I started playing baseball, I played all the positions, but I liked catching the most. But it was Brother Matthias and the others who convinced me that, well, being a left-handed catcher just didn't make sense. I was 17 years old when Brother Matthias made me a pitcher. Well, he actually did it to take me down a notch. We were playing another boys' school, and our pitchers were getting knocked all over the lot. After a while, I just couldn't take it anymore. So I just stood up and I burst out laughing. Brother Matthias called timeout and come walking over to the catcher's box. He said, "George, what's so funny?" That guy out there getting his brains knocked out. And I doubled over with laughter. He just looked at me for a moment, and then he said, "All right, George, you go out there and pitch." Well, I stopped laughing. "I've never been out there. I don't know how to get the ball over the plate." He said, "Well, you must know something about it. You know your friend out there isn't any good, so you go out there and show him how it's done." Well, I knew he was serious, so I took off my mask, borrowed a finger mitt, and went out to the mound. Now, I'd never been out there before. I didn't even know how to stand on the rubber. But you know, the moment I got out there, it's like I was born out there. And soon I was getting the ball over the plate and striking guys out. And after a while, kid-like, I started throwing a curveball, and well, I kept my tongue in the corner of my mouth. Well, that was a habit I kept until my first big league manager, Bill Kerrigan, told me I was telegraphing my curves with my tongue, so I finally stopped. Well, after that, Brother Matthias never let me get too far away from the pitcher's mound. He was a big man, but I never heard him raise his voice, and that's something I wasn't used to. We didn't fear him, but we loved and respected him. Now, I understand that fellows who have had schooling such as mine don't even talk about their schools, or they poo-poo the whole matter. But I want you to know that I'm as proud of that school as any Harvard man is proud of his. And if you allow me to be crude for a moment, I'll pop anybody in the beezer who talks up against it. Now, when I was going to leave school, tailoring was going to be my trade, but baseball got in the way. A fellow by the name of Jack Dunn, who owned the minor league Baltimore Orioles, came out to see me pitch. Well, after the game, he asked me if I'd like to play for the Orioles. I said, sure. And then he started talking about a contract. You're going to pay me to play baseball? $600 a year, he said. Well, that was more money than I thought there was in the whole world at the time. Because I had been been placed in the school until I was 21, Dunn had to become my guardian, so I couldn't leave school till February of the next year. The night we went down to the train station, I was all excited, but the other ball players didn't talk to me, which is all right, because all I could think about was tomorrow and the years to come and what would happen. Well, I couldn't sleep that night. Well, this was the first time I was ever going to be out of Baltimore. And this was my first time ever on a train. And there was another reason I didn't sleep that night. One of the older players convinced me. Do you remember those old sleeper cars? How they had the hammocks in there where you used to put your clothes to hang up? Well, they convinced me they put that hammock in my car so I could put my pitching arm in there to give it a rest. Well, wanting to act like a pro, I kept it in there all night. Well, the next morning, when we pulled into Fayetteville, North Carolina, the Orioles had their first injury of the 1914 season. A young pitcher by the name of Ruth had a sore and stiff arm from giving it such loving care. When we got off to train in the morning, I noticed it was so much warmer there than back in Baltimore. I guess I should have paid a little more attention to geography in school. Dunn came over to me when we got off the train and said, "George, you won't be getting any money until the season starts, so I'm going to give you an advance of $5. $5? I'd never had that much money in my pocket at one time before. Oh, but it just kept getting better. That morning when we were sitting down at the restaurant and going over the menus, one of the players yelled out, "Hey kid, order what you want to. The team pays for your feed while you're in spring training." You mean I can order whatever I want and I don't have to pay for it? I was on my third stack of wheat cakes and my third slab of ham without coming up for air when I noticed the other players were staring at me. Well, I didn't pay attention. I just kept on eating. Mr. Pipgrass, who wrote for the paper, looked over at me and said if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it. I said, "A fellow has to be strong to play baseball, doesn't he?" Well, when Dunn came by and saw the ruins, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Hey, George, we've got 27 guys on this team. Save some for them, will you?" I got the name Babe early in those days. Now, Dunn had a habit of bringing in young, fresh-faced kids to teach them how to play ball. When he brought me in, one of the players yelled out there, "Hey, here comes Dunn and his new Babe." Well, that started it, I guess, but it got out of control in a few days. It got to be quite a joke the way I walked around starry-eyed all the time with a big smile on my face. Oh, I was as proud of that Orioles uniform as I was of my first pair of long pants. Dunn had to actually take me from the locker room and put me on the pitcher's mound. Every morning I'd go down to the train station to watch the trains come in. But you can bet I was always back in time to be first in line when the restaurant opened. Now in that hotel was the most magnificent piece of mechanism that I'd ever seen. Well, I'd ride that elevator all day long just to watch the operator handle the gears and stop it level with the floors. Well, after a while, I couldn't take it any longer, so I bribed him with some of the money that Dunn gave to me to let me operate it. My career, in fact, my life, almost ended that day. I had the doors wide open, and I was rubbernecking up and down the hallway as I was taking it up to the next floor. A player saw it and yet, "Get your dang fool head in!" And I did, just in time to keep my head from getting crushed. Well, when Dunn found out about it, he chewed the stuffings out of me. And what he didn't say, the other players said for him. Well, after a while, one of them said, "You're just a babe in the woods." After that, they called me Babe. Now, in those days, the Orioles were having a hard time. Even though we were in first place in the International League, we were being outdrawn at the gate by the new Federal League team, the Baltimore Terrapins. Well, Dunn was losing money, so after a while, he started selling off players. He sold Ernie Shore and Ben Egan and myself to the Boston Red Sox. When I got to the Red Sox, they had heard that I was a fresh kid who did a lot of talking and didn't have any respect for older ball players. That wasn't true. I may have been a little fresh, but I just wanted them to know that I was as good as any pitcher on the Red Sox. The thing that they didn't like was the fact that I liked to take batting practice. I'd go out there and try and spend hours in the batting cage. One day when I came to the park, I found that all my bats had been sawed in two. Other than that, I guess I got along all right. Well, it became apparent after my first game against the Cleveland Indians, I won 4-3. I gave up 8 singles, including 2 to Joe Jackson, the great Cleveland outfielder. I think that if Joe Jackson hadn't gotten himself in the doghouse, he'd have gone down as one of the greatest hitters that our game has ever known. We weren't going to beat the Athletics for the pennant, so they sent me down to Providence to help them win the pennant in an international league. All in all that year, I won 22 games and lost only 8. Oh, I was feeling my oats, but my hat still fit. At Providence, my manager was Bill Donovan, Wild Bill Donovan, they called him. He was a former pitcher. He gave me some advice down there that helped me when I got back to the Red Sox. He told me that he too liked to throw that ball past the hitters when he was a young fellow, but I should remember, I had to take care of my arm. You have to treat your arm like your best friend. You have to take care of that arm. It is the only friend you have. He said, the strikeouts look good, he said, but the other outs, to the outfield and the first base, count as outs in the box score too. So remember that. Take care of your arm. In 1915, my first full year in the big leagues, I won 18 games and lost 9. Now, a young man who did so much carousing couldn't have done that well. I hit .315 with 10 doubles, 1 triple, and 4 home runs. The guys in the press box said that if I played every day instead of 1 in every 4, that I'd be right up there with the league leaders in home runs. Well, in those days, it only took 10 or 11 to be known as a home run king. That year, 1915, I hit my first home run. It came off a fellow by the name of Jack Warhop. It was a fellow from a small town called Hinton, West Virginia. Now, Jack was a fireman in the off-season. Well, he tried to fire one past me, but I put some smoke behind it and drove her over the right field wall at the Polo Grounds. Now, in those days, the Yankees would play at the Polo Grounds when the Giants were out of town because they didn't have their own ballpark. It was the first of the 714 home runs I can proudly say I hit. My 18 wins that year did us some good. We beat out the Detroit Tigers by winning 101 games to their 100. They became the first major league team to win 100 games and not win the pennant. We played Brooklyn that year in the World Series, and I didn't get the pitch, but I did bat once and grounded out to the first baseman. It was the first of the 10 World Series I can proudly say I appeared in. In 1916 and 1917, I won 23 games each year. But 1917, well, I have to admit, I'm not fooling anybody. I put some gray hairs on our manager's head. I heard the story later from one of the Boston players. He said that Ben Egan went to the manager and said that he didn't want to be my roommate anymore. He said that I had used his toothbrush. And when he talked to me about it, I said, "That's all right, Ben. I'm not particular." Back in 1915, I thought I was old enough and rich enough to take myself a wife. Her name was Helen Woodring. She worked at a little coffee house where we'd go every morning to have breakfast. Oh, we'd kid around all the time. But one day I said, "Hey, Helen, why don't you and I get married?" Well, she thought for a while, and then she said, "Yes." Well, I figured I was going to spend the next 20 years of my life married to this woman and being a starting pitcher for the Red Sox. But in 1918, what with the war and all, and with our general lack of hitting, they made an outfielder out of me. Oh, learning to play the outfield was hard, but hitting came naturally. In 1918, I did win 13 games, and we once again went to the World Series and played the Chicago Cubs. It was then that I set a record that I am most proud of. 29 consecutive shutout innings in the World Series. I probably could have ran those goose eggs a little longer if, well, the night before I was horsing around with the backup catcher on the train, and I took a swing at him and he ducked, and well, I hit my hand against the steel side of that railroad car. My hand immediately swelled up. Well, Ed Burrow was now our manager, and he yelled and screamed at me and said, "Don't you want to win, kid?" I said, "It's all right, Ed. I can pitch tomorrow if you want me to." Well, I knew right off I was in trouble because I could barely get a grip on the ball. And somehow I got through 7 innings. Then they finally scored 2 runs on me. Well, I had driven in 3 runs, and I wanted to finish the game. But when I walked the first 2 batters in the 9th inning, they took me out and put me in left field. We hung on and won the game 3-2. It was the 3rd World Series game that I won as a pitcher, and my last. Well, in 1919, I hit 29 home runs, a new world record. So I thought then that I would spend the rest of my career as an outfielder for the Boston Red Sox. But as you probably know, in 1920, I was sold to the New York Yankees. Oh, the Yankees were a wild club in those days. They had a night rider at every position. Colonel Huston, the owner of the team, and Ed Burrows, who now was working for the Yankees as a general manager, decided that he was going to put a stop to all the carousing going on. After all, it was the Prohibition. So he hired a private detective to follow us around and send nightly reports to the Yankees about what we were doing. Well, this guy pretended to be a businessman who was following the Yankees around as part of his vacation. Oh, he knew places to go to in Detroit and Chicago. And one time, after an exhibition game, he took us to a politically connected place out in Joliet. Oh, and he brought a photographer along. He said he wanted some pictures of us to hang up in his office when he got back. When he got the pictures back, we signed them all. Even a couple of us was standing there leaning against one of the vats. Well, when we got back to New York, the Colonel and Burroughs were waiting for us, and they find everybody in the picture. We never did see that Dick again. And it's probably a good thing. But you know, he knew a lot of good places. I played on a lot of great New York teams, but the greatest of them all was the 1927 New York Yankees. I believe it was the finest baseball team ever put together. We had the best pitching staff in the major leagues, led by a fellow by the name of Wilcie Moore, a tall, skinny farmer from Oklahoma. Well, Wilcie led the league with 19 wins that year, and he could either start or relief. When we first saw him, I looked him over and I said, he's got to be the worst batter in the league. And I bet him $300 to his 100 that he wouldn't get 3 hits all year. It looked like it was a piece of cake. And then the rascal bore down the last half of the season, ended up with 5 hits. And, well, he took that $300, went back to Oklahoma, and bought 2 mules. One he called Babe, and the other Ruth. Most to the surprise of both of them, I imagine. Now, 1927 was the year that I hit 60 home runs. But I couldn't have done it if it hadn't been for Lou Gehrig. Lou started putting the wood to the ball that year. And for a while, we were going neck and neck. And each day, the newspapers would have what they called the home run barometer, showing what we had both done and where we stood. I finally bore down in September and ended up beating Lou by 13 home runs. That year in the World Series, we won the World Championship the day before it started. We were in Pittsburgh playing the Pirates that year. And at their park, we were taking batting practice. And Lou and I were hitting line drive after line drive into the right field seats. And then Musial and Lazari got up and did the same thing to left. And the Pirate players were sitting there, and you could see their mouths drop open. And you could hear them go. And some of them just walked away and shaking their heads. We beat them in 4 straight, the first American League team to do so. In 1928, we got back to the World Series again and played the St. Louis Cardinals. Now, it was in 1928. The little fellow by the name of Johnny Sylvester fell off his horse and got kicked in the head. They thought he wasn't going to make it. So his dad asked his friend, who was a banker who worked with the Yankees, if he would take some balls to the ballpark and have them signed. I signed the ball. Get well, Johnny. I'll hit a home run for you. The ball got to him. And that night I was better than my word. Because that night I hit 3 home runs, becoming the first man to hit that many in the World Series. A lot of things went on in the 20s. In 1920, word came out that the 1919 World Series had been fixed. The Chicago White Sox had thrown the World Series to the Cincinnati Reds. I felt as if my church had sold out. I didn't care what kind of grievances those players had against Comiskey. I couldn't see how they could let down millions of fans and millions of kids by throwing the biggest sporting event of the year. Well, the owners got together and hired Kennesaw Mountain Landis to try and straighten out the game. And a lot of people say that he did it and brought it back. But others say that it was my home run hitting that brought the people back to the ballpark. I don't know if that's true. But if it is, it's the only epitaph I'll ever need. Now, in the 20s, the Giants wanted us out of the Polo Grounds because we had become the first major league team to draw over 1 million people in their ballpark. So in 1923, Yankee Stadium opened. It was the first ball field that was called a stadium in America. The newspaper guys said that they were able to buy the land and build the stadium because of all the people that come out to see me bat. Well, I don't know if that's true. But I have to admit, when one fellow said it was the house that Ruth built, it still makes me smile today. In 1932, we played Chicago Cubs again in the World Series. Oh, there was a lot of hatred on the both teams, and I must admit that I started most of it. You see, the Cubs had picked up Mark Koenig, a former shortstop of ours, in mid-season, and I don't think they could have won the pennant without Mark. When it came time to split the World Series shares, they decided to give Mark just half a share. Well, I called them penny pinchers and nickel nursers, and well, they came back at me and called me an old man and said I was too fat to play baseball and I couldn't run the bases. And could I still want to be the manager of the Yankees, even though I couldn't manage myself? Well, we won the first 2 games in Chicago, and by the time we got back, the newspapers gave it a lot of play. Oh, those Cub fans were terrible. But the worst of them were the ladies. Now, they took everything we said about their players personally, as if we were attacking them. When Claire, my second wife, and I went to the hotel, they were lined up outside in 2 rows like a gauntlet. They had words I had never heard before. But the worst thing was their spitting. Their spitting and their lack of aim. Well, poor Claire got the brunt of it. When we got upstairs, I told her I would do something the next day to take the wind out of those Cubs' sails, and their fans too. Well, when I came up to bat for the second time, there was nobody in that park as sore as I was. I hadn't seen anything to hit the first time up. Charlie Root was pitching for the Cubs, and when I stepped into the box, I pointed to the seats in center field. Now, Charlie got up there and threw a fastball down the heart of the plate. Before the umpire could say anything, I said, "Strike 1," which it was. Oh, the fans started going crazy. They even started throwing fruits and vegetables at me. I got back in the box and once again pointed to the center field bleachers. Charlie came down with another hard one down the gut of the plate. "Strike 2," I said, and it was. Now the fans were going wild, and all the Cub players were standing on the top step of the dugout, yelling and screaming at me. Before I got back in the box, I once again pointed to the center field bleachers. Now, if Charlie had been smart, he'd have wasted one, but he didn't. And for that, many a time I've thanked God. He came over the heart of the plate with another fast one. And when I swung, I could feel every muscle in my body, every fiber of my being told me that I had never hit a better one. I didn't have to look, but I did. And that ball kept going and going and going and landed in the exact spot I had pointed to. Oh, I started running around the bases. I had never felt more proud in my life. When I got back in the dugout, Coombs told me that all the Cub players were standing on the top step. And when I hit that ball, they all fell back like they'd been cut down by a machine gun. That home run, even though it made history, did us some good. And we won the game. And we swept the World Series again. It became the only team that won 3 World Series and never lost a game. In 1933, we didn't win the pennant, but they played the first All-Star game in Chicago. And even though I was old enough to be the father of some of those boys, they picked me to play. Well, there must be something about big games that brings out the ham in me, because I hit the first home run in the All-Star game history. In 1934, we lost again. and my numbers were down. So at the end of the season, the Yankees gave me my release so I could go play with the Boston Braves. I figured I could end my career in the city I started. In late May, I hit 3 home runs in Pittsburgh. But on June 3rd, I decided that all the bases were making me run uphill, so I retired. It's no fun looking in at something you love. I really miss the game. Baseball, I think, is the greatest game in the world. Thank you.
I'm here with Gene Worthington, who's just performed as Babe Ruth. Thank you very much for being here. I really enjoyed the performance, and you sort of brought him off the page, as Chautauquans do, but it was very interesting
Well,
to see
thank you very much. I enjoy it very much.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the first question is, his was really a rags to riches story based on where he started in his early, from his beginnings, really. How did he handle the success that later came to him?
I don't know if he handled the success or not. I think the success handled him. Because you have to remember, he was raised in an environment where it was very intense. You know, he wasn't given he lived with a group of other boys. They were under watch, 24 hours a day by the brothers. And when he became a baseball player and had money, he just went wild. I mean, the first few years after he became a professional baseball player, he was just out of control because there were just so many things out there he had never experienced. I mean, he had never had a girlfriend. Now he had one on every corner. He never had any money in his pocket. Now he had, thousands of dollars at his beck and call. So he until he got married the second time, in 1929, he didn't handle it well. But then his new wife sort of got him under control and kept him going. So.
His parents sort of let him go to the industrial school. Who were his parents?
Well, Kate and George were his parents, and the father, George Sr., actually owned a bar. Okay, and that's where he spent all of his time. And that's how Babe got in trouble. He'd sneak down to the bar, and if somebody left a little beer in a glass, he'd drink it. And if they left a shot in a glass, he'd drink it. If there were cigarettes lying there or cigars, he'd smoke them. His mother died when he was 13. She had 8 children, and only 2 of them survived, Mary and George, Babe. And the other 6 died very early or at childbirth. And they had no control of him. That's why he was actually put in the school by a judge, because the parents couldn't control him. He never went to school. So he'd keep on getting arrested and brought them forward, and they finally said, well, you're going here. So.
I read somewhere that they sort of speculated he might have had ADHD. That's sort of a modern term. What do you think about that?
I don't know. They did testing on him in the 20s, and he was obviously very intelligent. Okay, he had, I'd never seen anything. It's possible, I guess, because even with ADHD, you can still be smart. You just doesn't have the ability to sit in one place for very long. So yeah.
When he got to the Orioles, and then he was traded to, or sold to the Red Sox, how did he feel about that? Because Dunn was his mentor, and
he was making, sure, he was going to be a professional ball player. Now this was the big time. He was going to make more money. He was going to have more opportunities. He's going to see a lot more of the country, because when he started with the Orioles, he'd never been on a train before. Well, he'd never been out of Baltimore. And then he got to go to spring training in North Carolina. And then all of a sudden, now he was going to Boston. So this was all fantastic.
Yeah. But his daughter, his last surviving daughter, mentioned that when he was at the school, he never felt hungry. He never felt full.
Right.
And so that sort of fed into it, no pun intended,
Right.
that he really, was able to do so much with the money he had now.
Well, yeah, he ate all the time. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about his family life. Now he was married twice.
Right.
The first wife, that marriage didn't last as long as the second.
Well, yeah, actually they separated in about 1920, 21, even though, they'd already been married maybe 6 years or so. And then he started dating Claire, okay, who was a showgirl, and he met her actually at a Broadway play. She had a very small part, and a friend of his took him to the play and introduced them, and they became friends. And he couldn't marry her because he was Catholic, and they didn't believe in divorce. But his wife started living with another man, a dentist, and she actually died in a fire in 1929. So then, after a amount of time, he married Claire. Yeah.
So how was the family situation with Claire?
Well, the daughters, were, because they each had a daughter, okay, and they all lived together. But Dorothy was never very happy with her new mother, and for various reasons, because Claire was taking care of her daughter, thinking of her first. Don't know how much she really liked Dorothy.
Dorothy's the first daughter.
Yeah, right, was Babe's daughter, by previous marriage, and so they didn't have a great family relationship. They got along, I guess. There's lots of pictures of them together, but it doesn't sound like they were very happy as a family. Actually, Dorothy went out. They sent her off to school, so she wasn't around much, and Claire got all the nice clothes. Claire bought her daughter all the nice clothes and all that stuff. So it was probably a very strange relationship.
The blended family didn't
Right,
blend
it
as
didn't
well as it
blend,
could have. Yeah. He was known for being generous. Tell us a little bit about his generosity, because
Well, he was generous to a fault. I mean, he would order a 50-cent sandwich and pay for it. A 50-cent sandwich at that time was a good sandwich, and he'd leave a $5 tip, or sometimes even $50. There's one story, he once bought 13 shirts, silk shirts, while he was on a weekend in maybe New York. And he wore them all, and then he left them for the maid. He said, "Here, you can take these." So, and yeah, he was generous to a fault. He brought Brother Matthias a car, that kind of things. And again, Brother Matthias wrecked the car, so he bought another one. But he only bought him two. So yeah, he was a very giving person, because he never had anything. So he didn't, so he just wanted to spread it out.
That's what I got from his personality, or reading about him, that because the beginnings that he had in the school, which was really an institution, even though he found his sort of calling through baseball by being there, it was still an institution, and it's like he wanted to rectify that. He wanted to help other children in particular not have to.
Oh yeah, he loved kids, for one thing. That was one thing. He would stay there for hours after the game sometimes just to sign autographs for kids. And when they'd gone, back in those days, they didn't have off days. Even though they would travel by train, it would take them 2 or 3 days to get from one city to the next. They would stop and play an exhibition game on the way. And the kids would come out, and there's records of many games that had to be stopped because the kids would come on the field and just be standing around Babe and tugging at him, talking to him. He'd sign their autographs during the middle of the game. He didn't care. So yeah, he really loved kids. He really did. He thought they were the future. So he wanted to make sure that they, the little happiness that he never knew, he gave to the kids.
Right. It sort of whenever he spread it around after he was able to get it. Did he play African American teams, Negro League teams, and others?
Oh yeah. Again, he thought that they should play the best, and he played a lot of the Cuban teams. Would come over and play, and he'd play against them. There were a lot of African Americans played on the Cuban teams. He played against them. Actually got him in trouble one time because he wasn't supposed to be playing them. And it was a strange time, very sad time for baseball, because there was an unwritten law that African Americans weren't going to play baseball. And whereas Babe was a product of the society of that time, I'm not saying he was a saint, but he wanted to play the best ball players. It didn't make any difference if they were black or white. He just wanted to play them. So
for the love of the game.
For the love of the game, yeah.
Tell us about the last time he spoke at Yankee Stadium when he was ill at that point.
Yeah, he had throat cancer, and they say that he never knew that he had cancer. Well, he almost had to know. I mean, you can't. I mean, he lost all that weight. A picture of him standing at Yankee Stadium leaning on a baseball bat, and he had lost about 70 pounds. And he said to the fans that I may sound terrible, but I feel a lot worse. So he knew something was up. That it wasn't very shortly after that he passed away. But yeah, and what Major League Baseball did, every ballpark stopped, and they died. They stopped and had a little service for him at the ballparks. And I guess they say they had an open casket at Yankee Stadium, and maybe 100,000 people went by to see it.
Amazing.
Oh yeah, he was like I told us earlier. There were giants in the 20s, and he was the giantest giant. I mean, he was the biggest star of the 20s.
What about I was going to ask about the Depression, and what did baseball mean in the time of the Depression?
Well, it was affected by the Depression, just like everything else was, obviously. But it said, there's a funny story. I don't know if it's funny. It's kind of sad that he was asking for $100,000 a year, and this is their height in 1930. And they said, "What? But there are guys who don't have jobs, and they're out trying to pull a nickel." And he said, "Well, why didn't somebody tell me?" So he wasn't really affected or aware of what was going on, from what I've read. It didn't register in his mind that a depression was going on, because that's when he made $80,000 a year. And in 1930, that was a heck of a lot of money. So he wasn't affected by the Depression. Baseball was, because attendance started falling off. And when the attendance started falling off, then the owners cut back on the salaries and the amount of money that they were paying the players. So they were affected in that way, but I don't think personally a lot of it registered.
How long have you been a Chautauquan?
Well, about 16 years, I guess. Yeah, it's.
And did you start doing Babe Ruth near the beginning or toward the end of your
probably
Chautauqua career?
He's the last character I developed for Chautauqua. I did Teddy Roosevelt, and I did Simon Kenton, and Johnny L. Lewis. I did Johnny L. Lewis for several years in West Virginia, because he was the head of the United Mine Workers for 50 years. And he's big in the coal miners used to say they had three pictures in their house. They had Roosevelt, they had Jesus, and Johnny L. Lewis. Those were the three pictures that were on every wall in every coal miner's house. So that's what actually got me started, was Johnny L. Lewis. I had done Teddy before, and then I found out that people would actually pay me to do him. So then it became even more fun, So.
Yeah. It gave you even more purpose and
That's right.
direction.
Yes. Yeah. I said, okay.
Now you run the historic Fayette Theater. Tell us a little bit about that and what that job is like.
It's an old converted movie house that was built in 1935. Okay, and the Historical Society in Fayette County approached me and said, "We'd like to open this theater up for tourists to come in, and we can do local stuff and all that." And I said, "Well, I'll go over and look at it." Well, when I went over there, they had garbage on the floor. The guy who owned it had thrown garbage on the floor. There were holes in the roof. And they said, "We'd like to open in June, on June 20th, which is West Virginia Day." And this was February. And I said, "Well, I guess we can do it." They had that thing ready in 3 months.
Wow.
And we've been going strong ever since. And about 4 years ago, I guess, 5 years ago, the fellow who owned the building had a lot of monetary problems, so he put it up for sale. So we had a group together, and we raised a god-awful amount of money in about 5 months to be able to purchase this building. So it was just everybody in the community seems to like it, and so it's now going to be safe forever, I hope. That's keep it going. Yes,
That would be nice.
it would be nice, yeah, because we don't have in our part of the country. There's not that much. There's no theater in the high schools. We don't do that kind of stuff anymore. We have football teams, we have stuff like that, but no theater programs. So every year we do at least one program that brings a lot of the teenagers in, to do performances. So it's
Very good. Give me what names are there, and where do you get your actors? And we have about a minute left.
okay. We get our actors for the theater. We have open auditions. People come in, and some of them have been coming for 20 years. A lot of them said, "Geez, thank you for this opportunity." Young kids will come and see a show, a children's show, and they'll want to be in one, so they'll come and audition for another show, and so it just kind of builds on itself.
Wonderful. And you've been doing that for how many years?
22 years now.
Okay.
Yeah. We actually took a show from the theater, and toured Europe with it. That's one of our proudest moments. We did a play called Smoke on the Mountain.
Oh.
Okay, and it's a wonderful show where we changed all the stuff to be local. And some people from Wales came. They were visiting in the neighborhood. They saw the play and said, "Could you bring this?"
Yeah.
And yes, we could.
Road trip.
Yes, it was wonderful. It was really a great time.
Thank you so much for being here. We've really enjoyed it. I hope you come back as another character soon.
Well, thank
Because
you.
you said in the question and answers that you had some things you were thinking about.
But yeah.
But thanks very much.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And thank you for joining us. You've been watching Chautauqua 2015. I'm Angela Rice Beamer. Join us next time. Good night.